Welcome to Bioenergetics Scotland. Today we're carrying on with this little mini series on journeys with bioenergetics. Today we're lucky enough to have the main man himself, Devraj. Devraj is the founder of the School of Body-Based Therapy and a massive contributor to this type of work. And he's really kind of developed his own sort of style and his own way in this work. So here he is. Welcome, Dev. How are you doing today?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. Just got back to Istanbul, where I'm living now. Been in the south for a few days, having a little mini break on the Med. Very relaxing.
Cool, very good. Would you like to just introduce yourself in terms of like your sort of work with bioenergetics, or how you got into it, all that sort of thing, your influences, and how you started this school of body-based therapy?
Yeah, sure. Wow, quite a lot, big question. A few questions
Mm.
there. I started getting into therapy. I dropped out when I was like 21. I'm in my 60s now. I dropped out when I was like 21, moved to London, ended up becoming a punk, living in the squats, getting involved in all sorts of dodgy things, lurking around Soho and always into alternative stuff. And then at some point, I thought I really need to do therapy. And that was like the late 90s or so. And so I started looking around for therapy to do and tried a few things, but they were a bit too kind of straight laced for me. I was kind of used to more underground or radical stuff. And I also thought like, it's all very well this talking therapy, but I'm so armored from my childhood. It's going to take, I was already nearly 40 and I thought I don't want to be in therapy forever. I want something that can really kind of break me open. That's what I was looking for. And then I got a connection to the Osho people. Osho was like this mystic who died 10 years earlier, but had been very popular underground in the West. And a lot of therapists had come up through him and they were very, they'd use any kind of radical technique out of the States or Northern Europe, and develop it and this kind of thing. And I started going to some workshops at a place in Dorset and also in Holland with Osho people. And that was just much more radical and full on and in your face. It wasn't like nice therapy. It was like you're in the group room screaming for hours. But it really did open me up and affect me. And I thought, this is good. It was a lot of emotional release and a lot of what's called encounter therapy, where you have to talk about all your judgments with other people in your peer group, and primal work, where you're working on very early childhood issues. And there also was quite a bit of body work, particularly bioenergetics in it, and breath work, particularly rebirthing in it. And so that's where I first came across the bow and the arch, basically being taught by some Brazilians who were over in Holland at the time, as part of this Osho scene. And I really hated it, basically. I just really hated it. In fact, it was a very attractive woman who used to lead it from Brazil, and I fancied her. But when you have to put your body in these postures, I just couldn't wait for it to end. And also because I'd had an ankle operation as a kid, and my ankles were a little bit different in their flexibility from the average person, less flexible in certain directions. I always had this feeling like I can't do it properly, I can't do it properly, and just it's not right for me, and whatever. And then at some point of doing bio here and there over the years, I eventually ended up training to be a therapist in this center. That wasn't my intention, but I ended up going there for years. And then the bio, I could see at some point it was really helping me. And like a lot of people, it was like I thought, man, this stuff's going to take off one day and it's going to be so huge. Everyone's going to do bio or whatever. And and then I kind of graduated from there. I was then living in an offshore community in the UK, in Dorset, and I started leading workshops. I was involved a lot with screaming and shouting stuff, emotional release therapy for a long time, and that was okay. But it was also kind of going out of fashion. People just didn't really want. It was difficult to hold it anywhere. You could hold it in the community because there was a space for it, but you couldn't really do it in a city or a town because even doing it in the countryside, in the middle of nowhere, people a mile away would hear if it's like a load of people screaming on a quiet afternoon or something. And so, and I was also aware that it was limited. It was good stuff and it was definitely real, but it was kind of limited. And at some point, like in the mid 2010s, around 2015, 2016, I just got more interested in bioenergetics and feeling like, hey, I just want to do more of this. And so I started casting around to look for online resources to find more exercises because I knew a load of exercises, but that I'd learned over the years. This is like 15 years into my sort of journey with therapy and being a workshop leader. But I felt like there must be a load more exercises out there. And what I looked on social media, on YouTube, which was super big at the time, I'm still super big. But there was very little there. There was a chap called Elliot Hulse, who was a famous strong man who I know a bit these days. And he was cool and he was really into bio and he had a lot of followers, but he also didn't, put so much actual information, like practical information, how you do this posture, what it's supposed to do. So I just thought, well, I'll just start a channel, and then that was about 2016. And then it just took off. And bit by bit, very slowly, very organically. I never advertised or did anything. I started running more bio workshops out in the world as opposed to just in the community, and I just got more into it. I'd already trained in very intense group therapy, like I said, all the screaming and shouting, and that was much more emotionally volatile. Bio brings up feelings, but the screaming and shouting, you have to know what you're doing to hold that space. You have to be in it for a long time. So having trained in that, I felt quite confident just leading bio just out in the world because I was already used to kind of, so to speak, dealing with dynamite. So a
Mhm.
bit of kind of a few rockets wasn't too worrying for me. So I got into it. My style kind of softened up over the years, and I'd come from a school which was very full on, very authoritarian, pushing people in a certain way, which actually had worked for me a lot.
Mhm.
And then I started to go more down that line as a therapist, as a workshop leader, just really being on it with people. And at some point, I realized it wasn't really working for me. And I started to change and bring in more meditation or more meditative element, actually. Even though a lot of the exercises you'll find on my challenge on my channel, or if you come along to a workshop, it's quite full on stuff, evocative stuff, and quite physical, some of it. I still really try to focus in the same way as you'd focus on like mindfulness,
Mhm.
that you're trying to stay aware of the sense of the body, but you're also opening the body at the same time, as opposed to just sitting or being aware of what's going on around you. And over the last few years, I've really focused in hard, as anyone who follows me knows, on feeling the body, on increasing the sense of the body as a way to ground and heal ourselves from the past. So I mean, I don't know if anything will change, but I feel fairly established on that as a kind of theoretical model. I also studied writing character structure for a while, which I'd come across as well, like around 2002, 2003, when I was doing my training. And a guy in California had written a good book on that, Steve Kessler, who I also know a little bit. And I took his stuff, and then I also had a lot of my own insights on how to bring, because he'd kind of really taken the body work out a little bit and kept some of the traditional elements in, and I wanted to change it around. So I started to do my whole own thing with character structure. I'm actually leading a 7-day training on that in January for anyone who's interested. And I just started to really, I felt modernize that, try and bring it back out into the world a bit, because the people I found who kind of got into it, it really, really helped them a lot. So I got super into character structure as a kind of theoretical model, and nowadays I'm mostly working one to one in 45-minute online sessions. But with the character structure and that, I've found I can achieve quite a lot. You know, the main problem is just for clients, just to make sure they're really up for the kind of journey, because there will be resistance.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been quite impressed with how it goes. And I guess I'm quite innovative in the sense that, like, if you told me 10 years ago I'd be leading bioenergetics online, I'd be like, no, there's no way to do that. Even when I started my channel, I was, no, you can't do that. I run workshops in person out in the world. And then people were asking for bigger, more content, deeper content, actual courses where you could train and this. And I was like, no, 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 this is group room stuff. I was super close to it. And then slowly a little story started to creep into my mind, like, well, maybe, what if you did this or something. And then I ended up creating the journey, this 52-week bioenergetic intensive, paid for course online. And then that was super successful from the word go, like right at the end of 2019. And then a few months later, COVID hit. Everyone was in lockdown, so loads of people, that created a wave of interest as well. So, I now offer online courses, in-person sessions, one-to-ones, and I write books on the topic basically. So that it's become my life basically.
Yeah.
I've transitioned from being a normal workshop leader, therapist, living in a spiritual community to being out in the world, living much more on my own and creating content.
Awesome, brilliant. Thanks so much for telling us all that. So yeah, it's quite a journey, isn't it, that you've been on with
Yeah.
various types of therapy. One thing that sort of really interests me, I guess like often people when they think of something like therapy or something like that, they think, oh, I'll go and do something for a year, maybe that'll be a long time or 2 years, and then that's me, I'll be fixed and I can forget all about it and never have to think about it again. But like with yourself, you've been on this incredible journey with lots of, several different types, then you've kind of settled on this kind of uh, bioenergetics style. And I guess what, 16, 17, almost 20 years? Yeah. And you're still getting stuff out of it by doing, because you still do your own daily practice. So I guess kind of what I'd like to ask. So you underwent sort of like 10 years of this sort of encounter and emotional expression therapy. Then you got sort of more focus on the bioenergetics side. So for yourself, from your own personal sort of experience with it, what did you get from that transition? What did you get from bioenergetics, that made you go for that transition? And what do you get from it that makes you kind of actually carry on doing it to this day? I guess you've been doing bioenergetics pretty solidly from when your channel starts. So that's 6, 7 years or something, maybe not quite
Yep.
that, but yeah.
Yeah, pretty
What
much
what what
daily.
did you what did you
Pretty
get
much.
from it, on a personal level, and what do you sort of continue to get from it, now with your own daily practice?
Well, I mean, the first thing to mention is like I came from a very traumatized background. So I would have been, we don't really have ways of measuring these things, but all the main categories of trauma, abuse, abandonment, adopted child, mixed race child, blah, blah, blah. I don't talk so much about the family stuff because people are still around and it doesn't feel right in the public domain. But I had all the main categories of trauma. And I really closed off completely, went straight into leaving pattern, rigid, and just kind of classic, schizoid, rigid, and also strongly oral. I was super traumatized, and I
Mm.
was basically navigating my way through life from my 20s onwards with a lot of alcohol, living pretty much underground, in like in squats and all sorts of crazy stuff. And filled with stories and rage, just angry, 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 angry the whole time, and occasionally having girlfriends, but mostly being way too socially dysfunctional and never really having proper friendships with like more normal people, just drinking buddies or, squatting buddies or whatever, So for me, I came from an extremely dysfunctional background and didn't do anything about it for a very long time. And then when I did decide to do something about it, and I jumped into this very intense therapeutic process, I think about 5, 6 years down the line, I became much more functional. I could get girlfriends, I could get friendships, which were more with like what I would consider to be normal people. Maybe not the nicest way to say it or whatever, but like, just regular people,
Yeah.
with regular ambitions and desires in life, not crazies like we were. And but at the same time, as I got into so my life became a lot more functional, and I consider like now I could get basic social needs met directly, and have a good time. But first of all, living in the Osho community, there's a lot of expansion there. And then I started to get involved in managing the place and being a director and whatever, this kind of thing. So I was kept putting myself into challenging situations, and they kept bringing up emotions, and I still kept needing to scream and shout a lot and do release work and do some bio. And then over the years, generally when you do heavy emotional release, at some point you don't really want to do it anymore because it blasts your system. It
Mm.
takes 5, 10 years to get to that, or you need to be like approaching 50, but at some point it doesn't really feel so good, I would say. I always hesitate to say things like this because then some people will say, oh, well, I won't do it at all. Whereas for me, it gave me an immense amount for like 5 years and did good for another 5 years. And then it was kind of hitting the point where I could move on. And what we're studying character structure as well, for a while, I just became more aware of patterns inside of me. For a long time, I was living in community with super connected kind of thing in the Osho community, spiritual community. And I was just like, this is how everyone should live. The outside world is wrong. Everyone needs a lot more connection. And then when I came to understand character structure, I realized actually it's just me. I'm super oral, and actually so is everyone else who's around me. And that was a real Zen stick awakening on my head. Like, man, I'm so oral. And that kind of led to me at some point moving out of the community around 2019. And then, I was busy with this. And then I had a girlfriend for a couple of years, or we were together before, and then we stayed together for a couple of years when I was out of the community, living in Brighton on the South Coast. And then we split up in the middle of COVID. And then I just thought I'm off out on the road because I've been locked up in this country and community for years. And then I was super confronted with my oral side and my needy side. And I needed the bio to keep going, and I just got into it after a while, I think just as a maintenance dose. I'd wake up in the morning, I was a bit grungy and half asleep, late 50s, early 60s age, and that kind of thing. And then I'd do half an hour of bio. It's like a maintenance dose, and I'd feel more open. I could approach the day with, a nice feeling in my body. I could still feel grounded, like I could, so for a long time I was doing maintenance dose really with it and a little bit of digging into stuff. And then this summer I started to get back into breath work, and then that ended up with me experimenting and developing this belly breathing practice, which a load of people now are doing, where you actually have to physically move your belly in and out as you breathe. And then I've been doing that for 3 months now, and that's super intense, working in the belly knot. So, and it's starting to take out, I'm still aware of tension and stuff around my head, neck, around the back of my energetic heart, and so I still consider that I'm definitely on a journey with all this stuff, I'm on a journey with it, it's like, but along the way, initially when I started, I was like, I guess like most people, I just want to be fixed, do your therapy, get fixed, then I'm okay, then I'm just moving out, doing my thing. And I just got into the therapy and either at a maintenance level or digging a bit deeper. And, I just got into it. And I think also doing my YouTube channel, I became a little bit of a standard bearer for bio at some point. And I just realized, I just do this every day. I just do it, and it's like, and now, 3 months in with the belly breathing, it's not as intense as when it first was. It's still intense, but it's not as intense as when it first was. But I still feel like I've got stuff I'm happy to work on, but it doesn't take up my whole day. I mean, it's like I'll get up and then I'll go at that for 35 minutes, do some meditation, have a cup of tea, and then do my work, and I feel good and open for the day mostly, so it's like, and now I'm living, pretty much on my own in a city where I'm slowly learning the language, Turkish, and I have a lot of challenges going out to meet people, make friends. I'm much older than the average traveling person, but I feel with doing this work, I can still do it. I can keep myself open. I can keep going into situations that I need to go into, even if I feel not good or a bit nervous or shy. I can still keep doing it. And the ongoing practice is a part of that. So, it's like exploring yourself with some kind of drug in a way, like ayahuasca or something. And people just keep, the shamans still keep going. There's some other realm they want to explore, and I'm a bit the same,
Yeah, amazing. So you still get this feeling of like exploring the sensations and everything in your body then, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is also I think since the belly breathing thing, that's moved me quite a bit. I dropped about 7 kilos in weight quite quickly because I just lost my appetite. Well, it went down half what it was before. Snacking got knocked on the head, and then I noticed I could just feel my body more, my belly, and particularly my lower back. Like a lot of the time, I'm not really aware of my lower back. I'm not really aware of my back a lot generally. I was very out of my body when I started doing therapy. And even the scream and shouting, it gets you more open in your heart, but you can't necessarily feel your body more. I was still a long way out. And so this process of slowly coming back and feeling the kind of innate security and just the sense of the body, like, oh, I've got a lower back, it's supporting me instead of like, oh, I need to control everything in my environment because I can't feel my lower back. It's not articulated like that inside of us. We just feel nervous and anxious because we don't have this sensation in our moment by moment awareness of our lower back. And now, I can lie in bed and just kind of sometimes I just really get into feeling my back. It's
Mm-hmm.
like a drug or something. It's like this kind of oceanic feeling, and I feel like, oh, I've got a lot more of that to go. I can just get into the first layer of it, but that's a bit what it's like for me. It's like you start to realize the sense of a body is like some huge kind of ocean somewhere. It's kind of interesting stuff.
Yeah, yeah, is yeah. I always get this kind of thought that, I guess I've been doing bioenergetics seriously for 4 years or 5 years or something, I guess. I always get this, the word that always crops up is cumulative. It's like it seems to be cumulative, the benefits of doing it. It doesn't seem to sort of plateau. It just it always seems to be something more to explore with it
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. I feel like I'm still looking up at a big mountain sort of thing. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Um, it is like it's such a crazy long journey. Yeah.
Well, the other thing is, I mean, so I was, because I was so alternative when I jumped into Osho scene, it's like when I started to do therapy, it was more like, okay, I just want to be functional. I just want to get a girlfriend, like a normal one that doesn't take drugs or something, and like this kind of thing. That was my ambition. And then when you start to get into more the enlightenment scene and the whole human potential kind of scene, you realize that actually everybody has phenomenal potential that they're not utilizing.
Mm,
So my kind of vista of potential expanded from, okay, I just want to get a girlfriend and you know be able to live a fairly stress-free life for a reasonable number of years, to like, okay, wow, I want to do my whole school. I want to go deeper inside, and so in a sense, my sense of the potential of the world from how I've been brought up, just in Essex and London, it massively expanded as well. That also fueled my kind of inner, the idea that there was a whole. I had no clue that there could be any kind of inner journey when I was a kid
mm,
growing up. It was
mhm,
more like you got a job, tried to get some kind of girlfriend or something. Maybe you got married and had kids. It was just really, really simplistic kind of vision of life. It was a bit almost like being factory farmed in a way or something like that,
mhm, mhm,
and by the culture, And then when I started to get into Osho and spiritual things, it was like, wow, there's all this other stuff that you can potentially do as a human being that I was completely unaware of.
mhm. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's really interesting. Also, it's funny, like you talk about Osho, and it's obviously a big Osho influence in your work and what you do. Um, and I guess there's probably a few others. Maybe like sometimes you've spoken about maybe some of these exercises come from shamans in South America, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I mean, really, the kind of grandfather of this work is Wilhelm Reich, really. And I always think it's like really funny, like Wilhelm Reich's work was so clinical. It was all done in a clinical setting. He was obviously a medical doctor, and all his students were medical doctors as well. Like Alexander Lowen was a medical doctor, and it was such a clinical setting. But at the same time, like, and sometimes you read some of the books written by. I haven't read any Rice books, but I read another book that was written by one of his students, Morton Herskowitz.
Mm-hmm.
Gets into once it describes all the clinical stuff, it kind of gets into this almost kind of slightly mystical sounding stuff. It's very funny. It's just this contradiction of this quite clinical sort of setting, but then this story about this deep inner journey into the body. And I guess we're sort of going with this sort of question. I guess you know, you've sort of taken a lot of this Reichian stuff, and although of course you're from the Osho scene, this very clinical stuff, and they're so rigid about this must be done by a medical doctor. The original Reichians and some of the people that still carry on, this must be done by a medical doctor. But you've sort of taken it into this whole different world, right? Where it's like it's online and you can do it at home yourself, or you can do it on YouTube and stuff like that, you know? So yeah, I guess sort of two sort of questions, I guess. Have you ever had any pushback, or have any Reichians ever contacted you? Oh, what are you doing with this sacred medical work? Like, and then secondly, like, how do you see like people responding to this new sort of way of doing this work? You know?
Well, I mean, I haven't had much pushback, the odd little bit here and there. Over the years. I mean, one thing is like, we call it Reiki, we call it bioenergetics, but like, I mean, I've heard from other people, like some of the South American schools, that they don't really credit those guys so much.
Okay.
They say it's coming from shaman.
Mm.
So when I worked in the group room a lot, it's going to sound a bit weird, in the spiritual community, I was very aware that at times you're kind of tuning into some vibe somewhere in a different realm, and it's navigating you around. And even now when I'm developing exercises and stuff, I'm aware. It's just like, oh, try that. It's
Mm.
not, there's like a cloud somewhere. It is like a cloud, like the internet kind of thing. Where all these exercises are kind of sluts. I don't know if they're all laid out somewhere in some spiritual
Mm.
plan somewhere, but it is not as, it's not just like, even when you look at an inventor that creates something amazing, often they tell you it comes up suddenly into their mind from nowhere or something like that.
Mm.
The famous benzene ring of Kekulé or whatever, they suddenly have this vision of it in their mind. And so this traditional Western idea that this guy invented that, which is fair enough, but we don't really know a lot about Reich's techniques because he didn't write them down,
Yeah.
basically. And we know some of his concepts, and there's a Reich home book by this guy, who came about third or fourth hand down the line, Jack Willis, but some of which stuff I use, but and Lowen wrote about 15 books. I probably read two or three of them, actually, to be honest. It's like, I don't consider that I've been so affected by those schools, as far as I know. I originally had done bio with Milan and Pavita from Brazil when I was in Holland. The Osho school, they were Osho people, and they were hardcore. And I knew people who'd done met a few people who'd done Lowen bits from Lowen school, the IIBA, and that was much more gentle, and it was much more mixed with psychotherapy and a lot of talking. It was much more Western. With the
Mm.
Brazilians, it's like you're in the group room and you're moving. Put your arms up like that for an hour or something.
Yeah.
And breathe. And keep breathing. And like and it's completely different approach. It's very
Mm.
shamanic, because the
Mm.
shaman can be hardcore, really on it. And that can work for some people and not for others. But so my own background was not from Reich and Lowen. I had to
Mm.
learn about those guys later, and most of what I read didn't excite me massively. I would still consider Osho to be, he wasn't a super body therapist or something. He never talked about Reich, as far as I know. But like, it was just that a lot of therapists were attracted to what he was doing, and the energy that he kind of created, and this created this melting pot of therapy around that time. And it wasn't, it was the antithesis of super professional people. It was the antithesis. It was a lot of professional people came to Osho, but they were all just having sex with each other and doing mad therapies. Basically that's what was
Yeah.
going on. It was a huge melting pot. It was the 60s and 70s. The culture was in transition. And like, also, I mean, the West, even though it's got this very rigid mindset, it's been dallying with spirituality for nearly 200 years, certainly 150 years. Originally from like more like Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophists and this kind of thing, and all these old colonels from the British Army who would get massively into channeling and automatic writing and communicating with the Archangel Michael or something like that,
Mm.
back in the late 18th Victorian era. And then, like you say, people got interested in spirituality, Swami Yuktananda or Muktananda, and Paramahansa Yogananda, way of a yogi, and all this kind of thing, 40s, 50s, 60s, the Western psyche was getting ripe for kind of, something other than just kind of trying to model Ronald Reagan and be the ideal perfect American or
Yeah.
something, perfect Brit. It was like the culture was kind of ready for some Eastern influence or something different. So I never really had much pushback. Once or twice, one or two people. There was a guy, he died not long ago, an inventor, and I'd been hiring one of my students to like, contact people for podcasts, and this guy, it's just like, I don't know, he was super pissed off about me even suggesting it. But like, no, it's like, to me, this stuff is open source. I have somewhere a little place where I can check in, and I get a green light or a red light, and I think green light, okay, put it out. Like that. I'm not gonna, and I really haven't had much pushback at all. Very occasionally. Even I thought the IIBA, because they're quite invested in the scene, that's Lowen School, the International Something of Bioenergetic Analysis. But I talked to one of their senior members. I did a podcast with her, and she was super happy to do the podcast. And, she wasn't bothered about it at all, or me not, the stuff is basically open source as I see it, So I've never had much pushback. What was the other question that you
I think that was basic. That was.
Well, you said something about how do people relate to it now that
Oh
it's
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah. Yeah. So how do people this sort of new like because I mean I guess I kind of do see your work as a bit of a melting pot, of different things. You're doing it myself and all that. And I always struggle when people ask, "What when I do a class or workshop or something like that? What is it that you're going to be doing?" I'm like, well, it's kind of comes from Rife, but kind of not. It's kind of tricky, isn't it? But yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I totally get where you're coming from. That I guess, like, how do you see it affecting people? This new way of doing it, out in the world, out online via videos and like online courses and stuff. Like, how do you see that affecting people, like as compared to what you've done before that?
Well, it's like a vast uncontrolled experiment, basically,
Mm.
which was a phrase someone used for a drug treatment I was working with, years and years before I even went into therapy, called Ibogaine. Some
Mm.
American member of a National Institute of Drug Abuse had called it a fast uncontrolled experiment because these addicts were just taking this stuff and seeing what happened, and it's a little bit of similar energy, not quite as extreme, but like, I've just learned over the years to apply certain caveats to people, telling them where to be careful, what to watch out for. But otherwise, I think most people are good to go, and to give it a try. And as a general rule with this kind of body work, what I found is like, if you don't have a history of significant mental illness in the past, I mean, actually diagnosed issues, then you're probably good to have a go at it, because your ego will just pull you out at a point rather than go
Yeah.
too far,
Mhm.
So people can have a try at it online, and then if they don't like it, of course, they just move on to something, to watch something else, and if they get turned onto it, or they get a release and they get interested, then they can go a bit deeper, with the courses I have. But I really haven't had many people come back to me saying like, wow, that was just way too intense, and now I'm freaking out and I'm having a psychotic break or whatever. It's very rare that you really get, because most people can monitor, especially on their own. Because
Yeah.
this is one of the differences is, traditionally this stuff was always delivered under supervision, either in a group with a leader, with a group leader and assistants, or one to one with a therapist. And so then the therapist is also pushing you forwards and keeping an eye on you as you go, you know. And
Mm.
here you're not doing that, which means you need more discipline, but you can also stop at any time.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
sometimes, when you're working in the group room, the peer pressure or whatever drives some people a bit too far. I've
Mm.
definitely become quite adept at bringing people back from psychotic states when I was working in the group room with heavy process work for like 3 or 4 days,
Mm.
because someone's just chugging along with the group and going for it and going for it and going for it, because the whole group energy of 20 people is going for it. And then at some point it's too much for them and they're off talking to the fairies somewhere, literally. And
Yeah.
like, and you become quite, I became adept at pulling people back. But when you work like this, if that person was then just doing one-to-one, just doing it along to YouTube, they're never going to push themselves so far as they're
Yeah.
going to really lose it. You know,
Yeah.
they're going to pull out long before that time. So it's more about learning the discipline when you're working just on your own, getting some discipline going to make up for the fact that you haven't got a therapist or peer pressure going. You haven't got accountability there, you know. So and then you get a lot of chance to experiment, to try, and from that group of people that try something, some of them will come to do the work a bit deeper. You know, they'll feel called to it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
Mm.
because like a lot of the literature, if anybody ever reads any of the literature, a lot of it's like chock full of like dire warnings about, especially like Jack Willis's book,
Yeah,
you know. Yeah, it's kind of
capital.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
it's
it's
also
really
fair
in
enough
there.
because he was
I
the
kind of,
first guy. He was the first guy, as far as I know, who actually released actual Reichian techniques.
mhm.
And also, a lot of people were really, really rigid in those days
Yeah.
as well. Well, he was writing a bit later, but if you look at the 50s and 60s, you know, people were rigid, you know, and they were really, really rigid, upright, holding it together, you know, and especially in the States, you know, and it's like, sure, you start doing some intense breathing exercise because breath works is more direct in a sense, but it can also space you out, but it's more direct in a sense than the bio, you know, to be lying down doing these Reichian techniques. Yeah, they could, you know, so he was super cautious, and he also had a certain writing style which, you know, has meant it's quite difficult to get into that book as well, you know, for people.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's last question. Last question. So what's the future? What's the future of the School of Body-Based Therapy? Got any plans for the future for it? Anywhere you want to see it go? Any new experimental ideas? Push it in other directions somehow?
I haven't got a lot. I was thinking of doing a really long online course, 78 module. And then I just thought there's not going to be enough. When I started to plan it out, I thought there's not going to be enough new content in it to really, is it really worth putting all that energy into it to create it all, you know? I don't have any huge plans. I continue doing this work, I continue writing, and then it slowly reaches more people, you know. And I guess my own vision at the moment is more, okay, maybe someone who's a bit of a bigger name somewhere in podcasting picks it up or whatever, or something picks it up. But I mean, I'm very proud in a sense, but I don't really sell or push. You know, I really let people come to me,
Mm,
and you know, everybody who gets into this work is initially like, wow, everyone is going to want to do this, but actually, no, they aren't. You know,
mm,
the reality is 98, 99% of people out there are never really going to do something like bio. Even if they try it once, they're not going to stick with it. And that's kind of okay. You know, it might be a bit much for them, you know, or just not where they're at. So, you know, it doesn't sound so proactive, but I basically chug along creating my content, get into my daily workouts, and every now and again, you know, something new like this belly breathing comes along. I
mm,
super get into that and put that out, you know, but that wasn't planned, you know, that was just intuitively came to me,
mhm,
you know, and so I don't have any massive plans. If one-to-one sessions pick up a lot, like more than I can cope with, then I'll start to systematize the way I work with people one to one and farm it out to other people who've done my training. You know, something
mm.
like really starts to take up another notch. You know, if like Joe Rogan gets into it or Andrew Huberman or something like
That's
that.
the
You know,
dream.
it's like you don't know. I mean, people is
Yeah,
move.
for
It's
sure.
moving in that direction. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
stuff's moving in that direction a bit.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that'd be awesome if Joe Rogan got into
Yeah,
it. We'll see you next on the Joe Rogan show.
yeah. Never. You never know. You never know.
Yeah, cool, awesome. So yeah, thanks so much for chatting to me today. Super interesting. Some of the things you've been talking about. So yeah, it's Devraj, everyone. Thanks for listening. Devraj has an incredible YouTube website with hundreds and hundreds of exercises on it. There's probably enough exercises there for 3 lifetimes. You know, really, really awesome resource. He's got some wonderful books. I'll put and he's got his website, of course, and courses. Put the links in the description down below, and I recommend you to all have a look at that. So thanks again, Dev, and I shall see you all sometime soon.
Cheers. Just to mention also, thanks so much, Jack. I've got,
Yep.
if you really want to jump into this work, I've got a 7-day intensive in-person residential in January, second half of January coming up. Check it out.
Cool.
Cool.
I'll put
Thank you
some
very much
links.
for inviting me. It's lovely
Yeah,
to chat with you.
yeah, it's lovely. I'll put some links to that as well in the place I post this. Not right. Nice one. Cheers, Dev. Thanks, everyone. Bye.